Good good evening. I'm Sebastian, and today I am looking for my position of supporting an immediate military strike on the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And I believe that this attack should have already been carried already, but according to the United Nations, the Declaration of Human Rights has been violated by the political prison and torture camps of North Korea. However, in my first segment, I wish to give an overview of my position in regards to how the mission should be carried out. I believe that this move is that of an official UN coalition effort led by U.S. should engage the leadership of North Korea via a small surgical strike team that works in a concealed effort to reach their objective. Um, for this tactic can be found in the joint training exercises carried out by the United States and South Korea. The Oki Freedom Guardian exercises are being carried out starting tomorrow. With a premise and a precedent for a realistic operation against a regime that has violated human rights, there is no reason that stands in the way of an immediate strike on North Korea. I am sure that in this debate, we will go over the political aftermath and socio-economic crisis that will result in an immediate strike. But I will offer sound and clear solutions in the later segment of this debate. And for that, I open and I pass it off to you.
Hi, yes, I obviously disagree and take the opposite side on this resolution. I think we should not attack North Korea for a variety of reasons. One of which, most importantly, is that the Korea crisis just isn't a crisis anymore. Nothing currently would justify that type of an attack. To start out, I want to point out a major problem with the surgical strikes that my opponent is talking about was pointed out by a former Admiral Dennis Blair, who was the former director of national intelligence under President Obama. He told the Harvard Club just recently that there's, quote, no way to safely eliminate all of North Korea's nuclear capabilities in a first barrage. Starting a war with North Korea is absolute madness because there is no way, according to our very generals who oversee the program, to safely take care of that. And as my opponent pointed out, there are many political ramifications that would happen. Most people agree that North Korea's saber rattling is just that. It's saber rattling. They want to appear as unpredictable as possible so that they can further the existence of the Kim regime. They're very aware of mutually assured destruction, and they're walking a fine line, but they're not going to walk over it. And we're really too worried about the issue as a whole, just like we were about Pakistan back in the day. And I'll get into the meat of my arguments and the experts whose policy positions I rely on, but I'm just going to end this first segment at that.
Great. In your earlier argument, you talked about how there is no way we can deter. You said something along those lines of deterring North Korea's nuclear program and missile program. You said something along those lines, and my argument to challenge that is that I have a quote from Ken Gears, and he's a cybersecurity expert for Komodo. For Komodo, and he's also part of a national security agency, and he has gone on record saying that because of the limited number of servers and access points to North Korea's very restricted internet, if we were to also attack them through cyber means, we would be able to halt most of their missile tests and nuclear tests like we were able to do back in April. And there were no mass casualties when we did that. In fact, we actually saw in April a failed missile test. And Gez even went further to say that if war ever came, you would see our cyber commands wipe out most other countries' military technologies fairly quickly. Based on the fact that North Korea doesn't have great technology, it'll be very easy for us to really wipe out their missile defense programs like we have already done in April. And with that, I'll give you a chance to respond to my argument challenging your previous argument.
Yeah, that's a very interesting argument. One thing to keep in mind is that North Korea relies heavily on an internal intranet. They're not very well connected to the outside internet at all. So it's not really predictable that we could attack very specific systems. In fact, I would like to follow up with what 3 experts, 2 secretaries of defense, and 1 former president said about attacking Korea specifically. The Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis recently stated that attacking North Korea and provoking war would be, quote, tragic on an unbelievable scale. Millions of civilian inhabitants of the South Korean capital of Seoul would come under fire from the world's largest artillery force. And former SecDef William J. Perry has stated that, quote, it's not yet time to conduct strikes against North Korea. That time might come, but I think there is still room for creative and constructive diplomacy, end quote. And, quote, I think with high confidence there's going to be a military reaction from North Korea, end quote. Combine that with what the admiral and head of our military intelligence service said about not being able to completely eliminate the threat of a first strike, and you have a major problem. Not only that, but let's consider what former President Bill Clinton said. Give me a moment. Former U.S. President Bill Clinton was convinced that the intensity of combat with North Korea would, quote, be greater than any the world has witnessed since the last Korean War. And according to Bonnie Glasser, director of the China Power Project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, only one military option even begins to make sense, and that's if they already have a missile on the launch pad. That is absolutely not true here. We haven't reached that point. In fact, North Korea is dialing down their rhetoric. They took back their threat about Guam. There's no reason to start a global thermonuclear war and risk the lives of tens of millions of inhabitants of Seoul, a mere 100 miles away from the demilitarized zone. It's absolute insanity at this point. All the security experts agree. From the opposite side, we've heard one security expert from the private sector. However, they just don't have the type of information that President Bill Clinton had. Rear Admiral, I forgot his name, Kelly, I believe, in charge of the intelligence services, and 2 secretaries of defense, including the current Secretary of Defense, Jim Mattis, who, of course, has the latest information. No one in the security sector wants to do this. Okay,
you talked about how an imminent threat would risk the lives of many South Koreans and so. But we recently also, the Seoul metropolitan government has said that there are nearly 3,300 bomb shelters in the city, enough to accommodate all 10 million of its residents. In the Gyeonggi province, which surrounds the capital, the provincial government counts about 3,700 shelters. And there are also many train stations in the region, and those just double as shelters for the South Koreans. And there are many large buildings in South Korea that have underground parking garages where people fleeing artillery attacks can seek cover in case of overwhelming attack from the north. So the casualties, when we factor these in, can be very low to very minimal or none. Should the South Korean government be able to get all 10 million Koreans to safety in many of these shelters and train stations, and also buildings that have underground parking garages? And it is a strategic, it would have to be planned out strategically, but there is a way to really protect these South Koreans from a potential imminent attack should North Korea go out and commit such an attack. And with that, I'll give you a chance to respond to that argument.
Yeah, well, what I'd like to point out is that according to Sam Gardner, a United States Air Force retired colonel, he was quoted in The Atlantic as saying the U.S., quote, cannot protect Seoul, at least for the first 24 hours of a war, and maybe for the first 48. That is a city of 10 million inhabitants, as the opposition has said, 100 miles from the demilitarized zone, facing down the world's largest artillery force. No military in the world has more artillery than North Korea. That's not even counting their nuclear capabilities, which have been more than everyone is aware of those now, and biological and chemical agents. Sam Gardner thinks that is a huge risk, and Professor of political science at Pusan National University and security expert Robert Kelly also recently stated that attacking Korea would be, quote, insane, and that he didn't know of any analyst who supported such an idea. We cannot just take a risk with the lives of 10 million civilians that we have stationed tens of thousands of U.S. service members to protect. It's just too much of a risk. There's no way that we could shelter them all. There's no way that even if they're in shelters, they would be protected from nuclear fallout, from nuclear blasts, and from the wide range of tunnels prepared by North Korea to carry out a insurgency, the likes of which we haven't seen since Iraq or Vietnam. Something that most analysts are also very, very afraid of. And with that, I will pass the mic.
The United States, there was a source that I can't quite comprehend, but there was a source that talked about how, like, because you talk about within the first 48 hours or so that there will be so many casualties, but however, there was also reports on should the United States has the capabilities of attacking many of those nuclear sites, and they're able to knock out 1% of the nuclear facilities of North Korea within the first 24 hours of war, and with that, I would just support that argument and hope that they will have many failures in their tests like they have shown in the past, despite the fact the United States did not hack. And I'm just gonna harp on the fact that the United States can use all the options on the table. Cyber attacks in the middle of conflict, relying on North Korean tests and launchings to fail in regards to their destination spots to miss it substantially. Also relying on our defense systems to intercept any attacks coming into North Korea and our allies. And really that is what I'm gonna harp on. To really counter the idea that many casualties would happen within the first 24 hours, and that's just an estimate. I mean that does not factor in false launches, bad launches, and the potential of us thwarting many of those launches, and them having problems with the sophisticated weapons that they have. And with that, I'll give you a chance to respond.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm enjoying it. I just want to point out my opponent is using language like 8% of the nuclear launch facilities, hope, rely upon. When we're dealing with the threat of global nuclear war with tens of millions of civilians' lives at stake, we cannot simply hope to get 8% of the launch facilities. We cannot rely on anything but what we know to be fact. And we cannot simply hope. Currently, there's no justification for an attack. North Korea backed down from their threats about Guam. They do this every year. All the security experts agree it's something they do to boost internal support for the regime, to stand up to America, and to appear as unreliable as possible so that people will generally stay out and they will be able to continue the Kim regime. However, if we were to go through with this, the experts are clear, and I already quoted them. William Perry said it's not yet time to conduct strikes, and Mattis said it would be tragic on an unbelievable scale. Those are two defense secretaries. But most importantly, remember what Rear Admiral Dennis Blair, former director of national intelligence for President Obama, just a week or so ago told the Harvard Club when he said there is, quote, no way to safely eliminate all of North Korea's nuclear capabilities. If there is no way to safely eliminate it, according to someone who would know way better than I am my opponent, because he spent his life dedicated to the intelligence community and figuring out things like this exact type of security threat, how could we possibly take that risk? And why would we take that risk when North Korea is clearly dialing back its rhetoric? What we risk is tens of millions of lives, and my opponent would like us to risk those lives based on the potential to take out 1% of facilities which the experts say is impossible, and by relying on hope and trusting. It doesn't work that way. This is war, and we have to approach it with gravitas, more gravitas than our country has in the past, or we're going to repeat mistakes our country has made in the past.
For the record, I said 1% every 24 hours. And okay, and also to address another argument you made, you talked about how they're dialing back. I mean, look, I truly believe history can rhyme, and in the same sense, you know, when we signed the Paris Peace Accords with Vietnam back in the 70s, we thought they dialed back, saying, "Hey, look, we'll never try to invade South Vietnam again." And guess what? The new Congress we had, which was mostly anti-war, requested that the troops be taken out of South Vietnam, and they would give them weapons should North Vietnam violate that Paris Peace Accord. And what in essence happened was we ended up breaking our promise to the South Vietnamese, and they ended up taking most of all of they took off all over South Vietnam once we got out, and that was from the notion of dialing back. And in the same way, I believe history can rhyme again, where we trust that he's really dialing back, and then now we can have a similar scenario in the future where we have a Congress that says, hey, it's time to get out of South Korea. We've trained in military for defense, and but however, we'll provide them weapons should North Korea go back into their tactics again of wanting to invade the South, which every communist regime in the past, including North Vietnam, have shown that these are aggressors. These people are motivated to expanding the communist empire, and I believe it's fairly sincere to believe that when North Korea is dialing back now, that they're going to maintain this policy, even into the future, because this is a Korean regime, this is a Kim Jong-un regime, and who is to say that they won't become democratic like in Vietnam? They'll never reach that point, because it's one strategy. Unless we're able to decapitate them, or decapitate Kim Jong-un as another option, by attacking. Potentially by getting a new supreme leader in there, that supreme leader can have a different strategy towards negotiations in the table with the United States. But we should never be foolish like we were in Vietnam to assume that because they're dialing back, that we should automatically dismiss all attacks. If we're able to just get this over with and attack them and get rid of this regime and overthrow this regime, and taking into account all the points that I gave earlier, we don't ever have to worry in the future of all these men and women who died, all these men who died in the South Korean War back in the 50s, dying in vain, based on the fact that we decided that, hey, it was time to back off like we did in Vietnam. Many of those soldiers who died in Vietnam died in vain because we ended up retreating, where we actually started good work and we performed stability, and then North Vietnam ended up taking over. And it's in the same way I believe that this rollback will eventually change in the future, and North Korea will take over South Korea. And with that, I'll give you a chance to respond.
What would have made those veterans die in vain is if we lost the civilian population of Seoul, and the reason we left Korea to begin with was because, of course, they were being reinforced by Chinese forces, which we might even have to face again, because China and North Korea have signed the Sino-North Korean Mutual Aid and Cooperation Friendship Treaty. It doesn't expire until 2021, and it promises military aid if anyone invades the other country. China is bound by that treaty to help North Korea. They've been very clear that they will absolutely not accept a border with a capitalistic state. It's just one more reason on top of the many more important reasons I actually want to focus on why we cannot invade North Korea. Again, my opponent has said we want to avoid being foolish. I agree with that. We have to avoid being foolish. He and General Mattis both agree, or not General Mattis, Admiral Dennis Blair both agree that it's impossible to take out all of the nuclear weapons, all of the weapons. My opponent, I forget what percent it was he said he could do, but it wasn't 100% right at the start. All the experts, the ones I quoted, have said that can't be done. And the Defense Department has for years maintained that in addition to those nuclear weapons, they have chemical weapons, they have biological weapons, they have a network of tunnels that extends south of the DMZ. They have sleeper cells planted in South Korea. It would be a bloody, messy affair. However, we don't need to be worried because what we know is they're already dialing back. They took back their threat about Guam. And if you've been paying attention over the past 10 years, during the spring and the late winter and into the summer, when there's not much to do at home, they dial up this rhetoric. They really want to rally the troops around the cause. They don't want any defectors from dear leader, and they like to be aggressive. However, as soon as harvest hits, as soon as we enter the fall, they have to resume their agricultural activity, and it's complete silence. Just like the past 2 weeks have been almost complete and utter silence from the Kim regime, now would be the worst time to start an utterly unnecessary global nuclear war.
I want to address a point. You talk about how the United States, China is committed to North Korea's defense, an agreement that is in effect until 2021, which I do not dismiss because of the fact they say they do not want to share a border with a capitalistic system that you talked about coming from China, if I'm not mistaken with what you said. Now you see how committed they are towards expanding their communist regime and supporting their own fellow communist brothers and sisters. And it's in the same way that I believe we are in essence showcasing that support to South Korea from the potential of say the Congress that we have now is not the Congress that's there, or say we don't have the same president, say Donald Trump is not the same president, and continuing this consistent presence in the Korean Peninsula, and then when we have a new president, a new Congress by 2021, while China has the great capability of renewing their commitment to North Korea, there is great potential, and I'm using it as from the basis of history can rhyme, of having a Congress that says, hey, it's about time. For over 70 years we've been there. It's about time we get our troops out of there. But however, we're going to provide military aid to Japan and South Korea, and an alliance should they should invasion persist. And what can potentially happen is another history rhyming where China assists North Korea, and we have a Congress that says no, we're not going to give them weapons, just like we saw in Vietnam. They broke their treaty with South Vietnam, saying we was going to give them weapons in case North Vietnam invades, and then they did not give the weapons, and then North Vietnam completely took over South Vietnam. And that's what could potentially happen when we do not just get this over with and just attack as soon as possible. And look, all these military experts, they're giving estimates. They're giving what could potentially happen. Until war breaks out, it's then we'll be really able to see. And I am confident that North Korea will not succeed in its attacks on the United States. And I base this on the fact that they have failed military tests without any hacking of their facilities. And when we have hacked their facilities, they had a failed missile launch where they were expected to go a certain distance, but then it stopped short of that distance. And it's with those capabilities that we have, great cyber security, attacking their facilities. Can we expect to really break down their ability to cause a mass casualty as predicted? And do all the further things that many of the experts you have quoted say could potentially happen in a war scenario with North Korea. And
I just wanted to quickly conclude by saying that I agree with what my opponent just pointed out, and that is we can't know what will happen before we start a war, and we would be foolhardy to think that we can know. However, in his last speech, my opponent said something along the lines of, I think, or I trust, I believe, I forgot the exact language. That's not what we can go off of. What we have to go off of is the experts and their opinion here. And across the board, the half dozen or so experts I have listed have all said that war with North Korea, if we start it without an imminent nuclear launch on their part that we can verify, would be absolutely foolhardy. There is no justification for it. It would be tremendously tragic, and no one supports it. What we have to keep in mind is that in the past couple of weeks, things have changed. We have to be smart about this situation, and we can't risk 10 million civilian lives because we think things potentially could get better if we go and start yet another foolhardy war on our behalf on as a country. Well, what we need to remember is that Mattis said attacking North Korea and provoking war would be, quote, tragic and on an unbelievable scale. Former SecDef William J. Perry stated it's not yet time to conduct strikes against North Korea. He said, I think with high confidence there's going to be a military reaction from North Korea if we do that, something that we could go years without seeing if we don't do that. And of course, Robert Kelly, the expert from Pusan National University, said attacking North Korea would be insane. And, quote, he didn't know any analysts who supported such an idea. Bonnie Glasser said that the only military option that even begins to make sense is if they had a ballistic missile on the launch pad. Sam Gardner, retired colonel, told The Atlantic the U.S. cannot protect Seoul, at least for the first 24 hours. It would be a humanitarian disaster of the most massive scale. What we have to do is look at the facts. We have to tread with the utmost caution, the type of caution that conservative leadership like Ronald Reagan used against the USSR in the 80s. It was with great gravitas that he faced down the evil empire. It was not running off willy-nilly on horseback with his six-shooters, but it was with great gravitas. And the stakes really couldn't be higher in this particular situation. So please keep that in mind in the civilian casualties as we come to a decision about this very important topic.
Okay, you gave an argument and that said that the United States would not be able to protect Seoul for the first 24 hours. But the infrastructure of South Korea is well able to protect South Koreans in case that were to happen, where we would not need the United States until those 24 hours have come, where the United States cannot be of greater protection, because those natural infrastructures that I talked about, that they have, I mentioned it earlier. The Seoul metropolitan government has 3,300 bomb shelters in the city, which enough to accommodate the 10 million of residents in South Korea. Those 3,300 bomb shelters can shelter them from a nuclear attack and any bomb attack that North Korea could potentially launch against South Korea. And not just that, I talked about how in the Gyeonggi province, which surrounds the capital, the provincial government of South Korea has talked about there are 3,700 shelters outside of the 3,300 bomb shelters that I talked to you about, more than enough to shelter more than 10 million. Where potentially there could be a strategy where we can even get some Japanese citizens into those shelters. And I also talked about South Korea also has other infrastructures like the train stations in the region, and buildings with underground parking lots in case of a mass attack from North Korea. Now, what we really have to really consider now, with all these information that I just gave you, is how will the United States government work with the South Korean government to really orchestrate a way for citizens to reach safety and get them to be all in like mind. Because currently in South Korea, on a yearly basis, 5 times a year, they have safety drills. They have safety like fire drills, like how you would have in a school, in case of an attack from North Korea. And many of the times it is really difficult to get people in particular places. So now the strategy would have to be to focusing more on getting everyone into those shelters when we do those military drills before the United States decides to do an all-out attack. And it can happen. It'll just require for the United States and South Korea to really harp on it, whether it's through radio, through news channels, really getting the Korean people to not go outside like as if a hurricane was coming, and tell them to stay inside or go inside of this shelter and getting them to safety. That way they can be prepared in case of a scenario where North Korea attacks. And you have 9 seconds. I'm gonna let you wrap up your 9 seconds. I'm gonna give my closing statement.
I just want to say, in the Atlantic article I mentioned earlier, it said Japanese and South Koreans overwhelmingly don't support this. We should listen to them, not risk.
Well, thank you very much for this debate. I really enjoyed it. And I really, truly trust that based on the information I gave, I really highly rely on that foundation for why the United States should attack North Korea as soon as possible, and we should not be unwavering, and we should not just stand back and later on in life say, what if? Because that is the reason why we considered losing Vietnam, and I don't want that to be the same reason why we would someday, our kids would say we lost Korea.